Hey.
Hi.
Hello. Welcome back, Misfits, and welcome back to a new episode. Today, we're continuing the conversation about the Bible.
Yes.
And we're continuing our surface level conversation about the Bible. We're not
Right.
digging in too deep here. We're just giving you some facts and some information that we thought you'd like to know.
Right. Just about the book itself.
Yes. So today, we're talking about the Old Testament and the New Testament, and we're just going to give you some details about each.
Right. So as far as the Bible, like we mentioned before, it consists of 66 total books with the Old and the New, and they are broken up by testaments, two to be exact. There's an Old Testament and a New Testament. I will talk about the Old Testament. The Old Testament consists of 39 books. There's 28 authors, so it's a good variety of people who wrote these books, and they are grouped mainly in four main sections. We have what they call the Pentateuch, I believe is how you say it. If I butchered it, sorry. But basically it just means the book of law. And these are the first 5 books in the Bible. It is Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. And it's also known as the Jewish Torah.
Which I would like to say for all the parties listening that I didn't know that's what that was.
Yeah.
So I've heard about the Torah, right?
Yes.
I know it's a Jewish book and I know it's a Jewish religious book, but
Right.
I didn't know what exactly it was. And the other day, watching a documentary, I was like, oh, it's just, I've read the Torah.
Yeah.
I felt
Yeah,
better
we've read
about
it, yeah.
myself. I was like, I know what that is now.
Yeah.
I had no idea.
Yeah. Ours is just included with all the other ones.
Yes.
So that's the first part of the Old Testament. And then there are the history books. And just what it says, it lays out the history of the Israelites. It talks about how they conquered the promised land. It talks about when they were exiled from Babylon. And these books consist of the ones from Joshua through Esther. And it's a total of 12 books. So if you want to know about the history after the Israelites went into the promised land, this is your piece if you want to go in there. The book started after Moses' death. So it started when Joshua took over from Moses and leading the people into the promised land. So throughout all these books, we see the Israelites conquer the pagan nations. They fulfill God's judgment and they settle into their new home, right? Their promised land. We also see them continue to reject God as king, and they demand a human king to rule over them. We see them continue to sin, all sorts of shenanigans, which we've talked about in previous episodes about things that they've gone through or that they've done. But as always, and like we've shared, God always, has put a promise on his people. And so he's always present throughout all of this. And so, it also shows us that the Savior is coming. He's bringing someone to save us. So even through all of this that goes on with the Israelites, that's predominant, throughout all these books. The Savior will restore all of God's promises to the people, and that's the message there. And then the next section is the poetical books. So if you want something a little nicer, a little easier to read, that kind of thing, this is for you. They're also known as like the books of wisdom. There's 5 books, and this is where you include, Proverbs and Psalms, those kind of books. So these are really, like, if you're starting to read the Bible, kind of not sure about the Old Testament, this is a good part for you to get into, to read about God's promises, and a lot of really well-written, poetic type of books. And then the last section of the Old Testament is the prophets. There are 17 books, and as if you heard our previous episodes on the prophets, we go a little bit deeper on like what they're all about. So if you want to learn a bit more about that, you can. But just a little overview. The prophets episode are, of course, books about the prophets. They include minor and major prophets, and of course that just means the amount of information we have and the length of time that they were around, I guess, as prophets. And they're just men of God who had a message from God, and they were instructed, chosen to give that message to the people, and God, used them to deliver that message. And that's what the prophets are. And that's where the Old Testament ends.
Yes, and that's the Old Testament. And I just wanted to remind our listeners, not our viewers, our listeners, about the fact that the Bible is divided into specific sections, like we've mentioned before, and that's what Yadi was alluding to.
Yeah.
All of these books are together. And so the Bible, as we said before, it's not bound chronologically. It's just in these different sections, like she said. And that's just a reminder for all of us.
Yeah. And it just, so you kind of know where you're at in the Bible, like how the books are related as far as the type, not necessarily chronological, like you said.
Yes. So now we're going to talk about the New Testament. The New Testament, or the New Agreement, if you listen to our previous episode, you know what that means. The New Testament consists of 27 books by 9 different authors. They are broken down in 5 different sections. So the first section that we have is the Gospels. That's going to be Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And these books are about the life, acts, and sayings of Jesus. And we've talked about those before. That's a really good place to start. Like Yadi said, you can start in the wisdom books, in the wisdom literature, like they like to call it.
Yes.
Or you can start in the Gospels, and it's just a really good starting point to just know more about Jesus and then kind of branch off from there.
Yeah, because these are specific to Jesus' life, how he started, his ministry, his death. So yeah, definitely a good place to start as well.
Yes. And the next section that we have is going to be church history. And this part is a historical narrative of the first years of the Christian church in Acts. So that's going to be the Acts of the Apostles. And it's basically the homies, the misfits out there doing the work of God and spreading the gospel.
It's after Jesus had resurrected and he ascends off to heaven and he leaves his disciples to be like, go off and do what I taught you, that kind of thing. And so this is where the church is born, where the gospel is really spread out, and you see everything that Jesus had taught, how they are now sharing it.
How they're like carrying it out. Yes.
Carrying out that promise and that fulfillment.
Which is really awesome to see, because when you see them in the Gospels, they're very green, you know what I mean?
Yes.
They're trying to figure it out. They don't know
They
who
make
this dude
mistakes.
is, but like, okay, let's follow him. And then you really see them stepping into their own and stepping into their authority when they go into Acts.
And branch out. Like,
yes.
I think in the Gospels you see them a lot together. Like they're mentioned together, and the 12 and the 12 with Jesus. And when you go into Acts, you really see, like here's Peter with, another person, and so you don't hear them all the time together. So that's how you also know, like, they've branched out. They've gone on their own kind of mission and what they need to do. So it's really a really good place.
Yeah, and it's also important to mention that once you read the Gospels, right, you have the 12 original disciples, and then once you start reading Acts, a lot of those disciples aren't mentioned anymore. Not to say that they weren't doing what they were doing and spreading the gospel in the world, but we don't hear about them anymore in the Gospels, and they kind of fall off. But that's just so you know that there might be a disciple. If Thomas is your favorite, all of a sudden he's not in the Bible. I promise he was out doing something. We just don't have it recorded.
Right.
Yes. We don't have it recorded in the canon,
in the Acts,
canon Bible. Yeah, in Acts. The next section that we have is going to be what they call the Epistles, which I think is a really fancy name for letters.
They're just letters to people.
It's a fancy name for letters to people, and it's called the Epistles. Yeah. And this section is letters that Paul wrote, or just general letters that were written to different churches and different people just throughout the world.
During this time,
Yes, during this time period. Like I said, it's known as the Epistles. These are 21 letters of advice, instruction, admonition. And there are specifically 13 letters from good old Paul, aka Saul, that we talked about before, and 8 general letters that are from other authors. Note that Hebrews is one that is unknown and uncertain if it was Paul that wrote it, that he was the author of. So we know there's a lot of debate. I don't know if you're in the biblical realm, right? If you go into the biblical Reddits, but there's a lot of debate about who wrote certain books, and Hebrews just happens to be one of them, where they're not sure exactly who, and by they I mean biblical scholars.
Right.
They're not exactly sure.
And they're
who
just
wrote
basing
them.
it on the type of writing that it was.
Yes.
Like the way it was written, it doesn't quite follow what Paul normally wrote. So anyway, not to get into all that, because I don't even know all the details.
We do not.
But that's kind of how they look at it in the everyone has a style of writing,
right?
And so Paul had a very
unique style. And he wrote so much that you would okay, this is his style. This doesn't really make sense. It might not have been him. Right. But anyway, it's not important. We have it. It's a great letter, and we love to read it.
Yes.
The last section of the New Testament is going to be the section of prophecy. It's basically an apocalyptic description of the intervention of God in history, and this is specifically the book of Revelations.
The very last one.
The very last one. I know that when people think about the book of Revelations, it might be a bit scary, right? Because it's about the end of the world, and there's the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, and there's all these things going on. But it's basically a revelatory book. There's a lot of history in that book, and there's a lot of context. There's a lot of symbolism. It's not a black and white book.
No.
There's so much information in that book that,
and it's not literal in a lot of things, so you really have to like kind of get the backstory about the time it was written, context. Who wrote it, why it was written the way it was,
so, and what they're actually trying to say.
Like what's the ultimate message, because it was written to like a certain number of churches as well. It was just like you said, an apocalyptic kind of method or message. Yes.
So I know that there's a lot of people that they may be hesitant to read that book, but if you look into it first, maybe listen to a couple of sermons about Revelations, maybe find the context, maybe a commentary or something like that, ask your pastor, ask your priest, you can get context, and then when you go into it, you have a better idea of what you're actually reading. Because I understand that it can be a little like, let me skip that one. I'm not trying to find out. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's the book of Revelations. So basically, in the New Testament, like I said, the last book is the book of Revelations. In the New Testament, Christians see the fulfillment of the Old Testament, right? So the Old Testament was all about the law, and then thankfully we have Jesus, and then it's all about relationship after. But we see all of the promises fulfilled. Everything that the prophets said, everything that happened in the Old Testament was basically fulfilled in the New Testament.
Kind of building up to now this moment that God brought the Savior and came into new covenant, which is what the New Testament is.
Yes. So that wraps up the Old Testament and the New Testament. We hope that this information was interesting to you. We hope it provided value for you, like we always do. We hope that you learned something, because we definitely do learn every time we do our research and every time we record an episode. So we hope that you enjoyed that. And next week we're gonna continue talking about the stories of the Bible, because we're trying to highlight important information about the Bible and give you more information, less deep dive information about certain things, but we're trying to highlight other things. And so we're going to continue the conversation about the Bible. So that wraps it up for us. This is Fran.
This is Yadi.
We are the Midtown Misfits, and we'll see you next week.
Bye.
Peace.